Welcome to the opening ceremony of the 16th Annual Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. My name is Son Ji-ae, professor at Ewha Women's University. It is my great pleasure to be emceeing the opening ceremony this morning, especially since I remember being at the very first Jeju Forum in 2001 like it was yesterday. This year marks the 16th anniversary of what has now become a globally renowned platform for peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and in East Asia. This year, our main theme is sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity, a fitting title for a world that is hopefully on the path to recovering from this devastating pandemic. It is a world that is not looking back, but looking forward to use this unique opportunity to build a world that is truly what we want for our future generation. And what better goal than a world that has long-lasting peace and is inclusive for all. But realistically, we are not quite there yet. As you can see from the limited number of seats in the hall and the rather complicated process that everyone had to go through in order to enter the venue, let me take this opportunity to thank everyone for your cooperation. The good news is that in order to share this meaningful conference with many more than those present here, the Jeju Forum will be televised through KCTV Jeju Broadcasting. We also have an online audience, if I am given the correct information. There they are. Good morning, everyone. That is the beauty of the world we live in today. But in addition to our online audience, let me introduce a few of our guests who are with us this morning. And to invigorate ourselves, let's give everybody, when they stand up, a warm round of applause. First off, we have Mr. Won Hee-ryung, Governor of the Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. Once more. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. Han In-taek, President, Mr. Kim Sung-hwan, Chairman of International Peace Foundation. Thank you. Mr. Han In-taek, President of Jeju Peace Institute. And Mr. Cha Nam-soo, Chairman of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Council. Thank you all for being here. Some of our virtual guests include Abhishek Wichachiwa, the former Prime Minister of Thailand, Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, and François Hollande, former President of France. Thank you very much. While we do not have the time to introduce every one of our guests, we are very much appreciative of all your interest and participation. Now, to get this opening ceremony off to a great start, I would like to invite Governor of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province, Won Hee-ryung, to give us his opening remarks. Governor Won.
안녕하십니까. 제주 포럼.
Nice to meet you all. Welcome to 2021 Jeju Forum. I sincerely welcome you all with the people of Jeju Island. We here have Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Prime Minister Abhishek Wichachiwa, and Minister Kim Sung-hwan and Deputy Assistant Secretary Mark Knepper. Thank you all for your presence despite the COVID-19 situation. We also have our distinguished guests joining us online. We have President Francois Hollande, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and Governor Jay Inslee. Thank you for participating via online. Distinguished guests, Jeju Island is celebrating the 16th Jeju Forum. This forum is searching for a brighter future of the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and the world. And this year marks the 71st anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. Korean War saw devastating sacrifice and casualties, and we still have not achieved permanent peace on the peninsula. So we have to pay our condolences to those people who were sacrificed during the Korean War. We should not forget their suffering and should achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula. The grand theme of this year's Jeju Forum is sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity. Standing on this symbolic stage, however, my heart is very heavy. Due to COVID-19, we have seen many lives being claimed and domestic and international economies being depressed. On top of that, the Northeast Asian geopolitics is more complicated than ever. I believe that for inclusive prosperity and sustainable peace, we have to have an open mind. So in that spirit, I want to share my thoughts on several issues that we must address. First is Quad. And then we also have supply chain resilience, D11, anti-foreign sanctions law. These are the terms that you would hear often these days. Quad is an informal strategic dialogue between the US, Japan, Australia, and India. Supply chain resilience is an effort to safely manage the cutting-edge industries and strategic materials. D11 is a set of meetings that adds Korea, India, Australia, and South Africa to the G7. Mainly speaking, these terms are the efforts of the U.S. Biden administration to check China's aggressive rise. In case of the anti-foreign sanction law, it's a recent Chinese law. It denies entry into China and freezes assets in China to individuals and organizations from nations with discriminatory measures on China. China seems to leverage its economic power against conflicts in Taiwan Strait, Hong Kong, and also the debate on the origin of COVID-19. In this situation, at the joint statement last May, made during the Korea-US summit, President Moon and President Biden included the issue of the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and the origin of COVID-19 that may result in Chinese sanctions on the Korean government and Korean companies. To be more accurate, tensions and strategic competition between the U.S. and China is becoming a reality to the international society. If this continues, then there are fears that we might face another Cold War. Like-minded countries will form their bloc and antagonize others, going into arms race, and trade barrier would be created. Here at Jeju, it's an island of peace. And watching the confrontation between the US and China here is very saddening. Peace will be severed and growth would be fragmented. The topic of today's forum is sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity, and that will also be threatened. As a governor of Jeju Island and as a responsible politician of ROK, I want to strongly oppose this vicious cycle of conflict. The US and China must realize the importance of their policies and its effect on the international society. As for the Biden administration, I want to say that containing China using its diplomatic, military, and economic muscles should not be the option. Rather, it should guide China to build a sustainable US-China relations. Some might say that the US is already trying that. However, if you look back the time of the Trump administration, where we saw the America First policy, the US-China competition began to heat up. And as a result, we could see China and even other several countries from the free country didn't support that policy. However, the US today is different. America is back again. The Biden administration is building a multinational and multilateral network supported by many countries. International cooperation is valued as exemplified by the return to the Paris Agreement. These valuable efforts are based on openness and inclusiveness, and that are related to the new US-China relations. As for the Xi Jinping government of China, I want to say that today's China is different from what it stated or pursued when it took the government. It stated the principles of harmonious world and friendship interests. Currently, China is wielding a lot of its diplomatic power to have its own way rather than making considerations for neighboring and good countries. Old neighbors are turning their back to China due to the thought retaliation and sanctions against Europe and Australia. Chinese tourism to Jeju have heavily been damaged, and that was one of very negative impacts that have happened. And China must remember that those actions can leave bad implications for its future. It should remember that its great victory or great history was built on the inclusiveness of its neighbors and on the peaceful promotion of culture. Now is not the time for anti-foreign sanctions law, but it is a time to revisit the principles of the harmonious world and friendship interests. By doing that, it can stabilize the politics of the region. And in that sense, inclusiveness thus is even more important. Inclusive growth is based on a fair and free market. I hope that the US-China competition does not lead to closing of doors, but rather it would open many doors and share many opportunities together. China must respect the market as the core for inclusive growth rather than a tool for political domination. For US, as a country of goodwill, it must guarantee market fairness and narrow the gap between the winners and the losers of the market. Thankfully, the US-China summit is on the horizon. I look forward to the dialogue between the two leaders on international cooperation for sustainable peace and inclusive growth. That is what this Jeju Forum wants to deliver to the leaders of the US and China, and we urge the two governments to make a smart choice, and I believe that their choices are directly linked to the future of the humanity. Distinguished guests, geographically, politically, and economically, Korea is situated between the US and China, and it is suffering from the strategic competition between the two. There is an old Korean saying that goes, "A whale's fight breaks a shrimp's back." Although that saying seems to be outdated, well, unlike the 19th century, when Korea was surrounded by imperial powers, now Korea is standing as one of the top 10 economic powerhouses. It's a strong middle power. Therefore, we need to have more aggressive and active diplomatic stance. Korea can no longer be cornered into a position where it should conform to the requirements of the strong powers. It should now stand protecting the founding values of its nation, and it should think about how to project its values to the international community. I want to make some comments about the principles and advices for Korean diplomacy. First, Korea should aim for principle-based future and principle-based peace. Korea has been anything but a steadfast proponent of peace. Due to the Korean War, many people were facing the threat of death. However, we always pursued peace. But however, sometimes it has been pushed around and pressured by North Korea and neighboring countries. I must say that that old habit should be put to an end. Human rights and respect for human rights should be valued, and we must have diplomatic relations that is based on open and inclusive attitude that is grounded on liberal democracy and market economy and human rights. We should not be pushed aside from wrongful pressure. If we do, then that will bring about even more pressure from neighboring countries. And by adhering to these principles, I'm sure that Korea can become a valued member of the global sustainable peace. Peace that ensures individual freedom and human rights is the only type of sustainable peace. One that ignores this, peace must only be made by avoiding the risk of offending the opponent, and that is far from being sustainable. We must have a longer-term strategy and have consistency and adherence, and that is our key task. If you look back the history, during certain administrations' terms, they sometimes made the simple mistake of overdoing it. Park's unification jackpot theory, or this government's peace event, for instance. However, the government's impatience paved the way for policy failure. They have overlooked the cold reality that the Korea's national strength alone is not sufficient to reverse the gravity of the international situation in the short term. I must emphasize the need for longer process diplomacy. This is not just about peace. It's also related to FTA and sharing of cutting-edge technologies, climate change, energy transition, pandemic. All these issues cannot be tackled by a single administration. We are living in a complicated and uncertain era, and diplomacy cannot be the exclusive tool of a single government. We need a longer-term goal that can be reinforced with longer-term efforts. It's the same for the US-China relations, North Korea denuclearization, inter-Korean relations, and international cooperation. We must adopt a longer-term thought process and a consistent strategy. Respected guests, in the history of humanity, we have the biggest threat and existential threat, that is the climate change. For that, we also need to have a stronger cooperation. G7 in Korea and total of 25 countries are joining the carbon neutral 2050 goal, and that will serve as a milestone. one of the best strategies in response to climate change is the transition of our energy sector from fossil fuel to low carbon. And in that sense, Jeju has been at the frontier. We have stated the carbon-free island 2030 and has been implementing strong energy transition policy. In terms of the electric vehicle and renewable energy, we are leading Korea, and we will soon announce the RE100 vision. And we will soon ban the registration of internal combustion engine cars from 2030. Jeju will continue to become the standard in green energy and green mobility. From a national viewpoint, we must reevaluate the value of the low-carbon baseload nuclear power. Under the EU taxonomy, nuclear power is classified as green energy. The US is asking for the cooperation with Korea in developing future nuclear technology and markets. We only should not think about nuclear power as what it did in the past. With the future technologies, the nuclear power will become even more safe and more accessible. According to KAIST researchers, the nuclear reactors are becoming very small, like the size of a tuna can. Energy powers our modern economy. From the environment to economy, national security to new technologies, energy is inseparable from human civilization. This means that the energy transition must be based on science and not dogmatic ideology, and that must be also based on a social consensus and reviewed by experts and get feedback from the society as well as the future generation. Distinguished guests, climate change is a common challenge for all of us. That's why we have to have a collective effort. Earlier today, I had the privilege of talking to Governor Jay Inslee. We discussed in detail about the future climate alliance. We have talked about protecting the beautiful mountain of Rainier and Halla, and we will do this by reducing greenhouse gas emission and increasing green industries. We must welcome more countries to join us in our efforts, not just for the military alliance, but also for battery and nuclear power. The US and Korea should have a green alliance. I had the chance to attend the P4G Green Growth Summit as a representative of a local government. At the summit, all the member countries were talking about the need for the Green Growth Alliance. Korea, the US, China, and Japan, we account for 48% of the global emission. That's why we need to cooperate together. That will be setting the good example for the world. And in doing so, it might lessen the tension between the US and China. Peace and prosperity cannot be achieved by a single nation. We have to have understanding on our value and create cooperation on our common principles and values. Only then we can have sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity. The father of the modern management theory, Peter Drucker, said, "Long-range planning does not deal with future decisions, but with the future of present decisions." I want to cordially invite everyone to actively participate in the 16th Jeju Forum so that we can make wise decisions for the future. Once again, thank you very much for coming to the Jeju Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Won. Speaking of sustainability, I have known Governor Won for 20 years, and not only does he look exactly the same, but his vision and his level of energy are actually higher than ever before. He must have a secret of sustainability that he's not sharing with the rest of us. Now we have a person who really encapsulates sustainability. We have a keynote speech from Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations. Secretary General Ban, we'd like to welcome you up onto the stage. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you for your warm introduction. Honorable Won Hee-ryong, Governor of Jeju Self-Governing Province, thank you very much for your very inspiring statement. Thank you. I really count on your leadership on that. I'd like to also recognize several high-level participants, including His Excellency Apisit Wechachiwa, former Prime Minister of Thailand, and François Hollande, the former President of France, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Austria, and members of the diplomatic corps. Your Excellency's participation is very appreciated. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Han In-taek, President of Jeju Peace Institute, for organizing this very meaningful Jeju Forum. It is my great honor and privilege to speak to you again at Jeju Forum 2021. My special appreciation goes to Governor Won Hee-ryong for having me back once again. I offer my warm congratulations on the opening of this 16th Jeju Forum. This forum comes at a significant time for ongoing efforts to construct sustainable peace and ensure inclusive prosperity in the post-COVID-19 period. This forum is also taking place at an auspicious historical moment. Indeed, 2021 marks the 30th anniversary of the end of Cold War and collapse of the USSR, as well as the historic Korea-USSR summit held in Jeju Island in 1991. Ladies and gentlemen, since its inception, the Jeju Forum has played a leading role in the promotion of cooperation and integration in Asia, as well as multilateralism and peace building around the world. This is particularly noteworthy today as converging global crises continue to threaten all peoples and our planet, underlining the great necessity of enhanced multilateral cooperation. I thank you, Jeju Forum 2021 participants, for your ongoing efforts in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, today we find ourselves at the center of a variety of converging global crises and increased uncertainties. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to upend our economies, societies, and way of life. Climate change is steadily worsening with the superstorms, extreme heat, flooding, fires, and droughts, all expanding in both in frequency and intensity. Great power tensions, rivalries are growing, hindering key geopolitical cooperation when it is indeed needed the most. Democracy itself is under threat, with autocratic nationalism ascendant in many societies. Meanwhile, cyber attacks are surging in scope and severity, recently against oil pipeline. Under this backdrop, I firmly believe that we must elevate, one, our sustained efforts to reinvigorate multilateral cooperation in order to holistically address the inherently global challenges of both today and tomorrow. No country is an island in today's increasingly interconnected world, one where trade, technology, and tourism continue to bring us ever closer together. No country, however powerful or resourceful one may be, can solve these global crises, including climate change. With this in mind, wars and nationalist isolationism are simply no match for viruses, wildfires, cyber attacks, and sea level rise or other transnational issues. As such, we require solutions underpinned by multilateral cooperation, sustainability, inclusion, and global partnership. But at the same time, despite the monumental challenges that we face, it also seems like there is now a visible fight illuminating a way forward out of the darkened tunnel. Now is a visible light illuminating a way forward out of the darkened tunnel. After more than 180 million COVID cases and over 3.8 million tragic deaths globally, a variety of safe and effective vaccines are beginning to be distributed. Multilateralism in disarray over the past few years looks to be making comeback and has been boosted by the early globally minded actions of Biden administration. Face-to-face diplomacy is coming to be back again, even slowly. In this regard, I firmly believe that multilateral cooperation and partnership is crucial to achieve sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity around the world. And this is now more than important than ever in aiding the global recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. To do so, our multilateral recovery from this pandemic and its secondary impacts must also address climate change and inequality to steer us to a more peaceful, sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous future. Indeed, we must build back better and build back greener by constructing healthier societies for all people and our planet. In this regard, the most urgent task ahead of us can also simultaneously strengthen multilateral collaboration, ensuring equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines and fighting against vaccine inequality. In this regard, I'd like to highly commend G7 leaders and invited countries, including Republic of Korea, who have committed to distribute at least 1 billion doses until next year. At the moment, only about 20% of the global population, mostly those in wealthy countries, have received one jab of a COVID-19 vaccine. However, global leaders have a moral, political, and humanitarian obligation to rectify the current situation of gross vaccine inequity and urgently come together in solidarity to vaccinate the world and bring this pandemic to an end. We must remember, no one is safe until everyone is safe. I take this opportunity to commend again G7 nations and recent pledges to help those developing countries. It is absolutely necessary. That is a moral responsibility for them. And these commitments must expediently be transformed from pledges into concrete actions. With this in mind, I call on all nations to enhance their support for the COVAX mechanism in its guiding mission to get vaccines to those in need, but particularly in the developing world. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we strive to vaccinate the world, leaders must simultaneously elevate their actions to harness the historic blueprint of the United Nations global goals to build sustainable peace and realize inclusive prosperity. Indeed, in this era of pandemic, division, planetary warming, and increased uncertainty, we should urgently recommit to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the Paris Climate Change Agreement. This will help bring us closer together, build back from COVID-19, and revitalize multilateral cooperation when it is now needed more than ever before. Doing so would also advance human rights, boost sustainable growth, promote gender empowerment, fortify public health, scale up education, and much more. The pandemic has made it plainly clear that we greatly need a dynamic new direction centered on health, sustainability, security, inclusivity, peace, and prosperity. And with the UN global goals as our roadmap, I firmly believe that we have a generational opportunity to build back better, help synergize climate action, and steer our planet and humanity towards a more luminous future. With your active efforts to this end, I'm confident that we can come together through cooperation and partnership and harness this pandemic as a gateway to a brighter world for all. I once again offer my warmest congratulations on the opening of this 16th Jeju Forum. Thank you for your leadership, and let's work together to make this planet Earth and our humanity live sustainable way and prosperous and healthy way. That's our responsibility. Thank you very much for your attention. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Secretary General Ban, for your very energetic call to action for the world to overcome the coronavirus pandemic, as well as to conduct climate action that is vitally needed for our future. Now we have another keynote speech from Mr. Apasit Wechachiwa, the former Prime Minister of Thailand. He will be giving his welcoming speech virtually. Let's give him a warm round of applause and see if he will appear on our screen.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you at the 16th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. My only regret, of course, is not being there in person on this beautiful island, which would, of course, have brought back memories, very fond memories of my previous visits, both in a private capacity when I took my family to vacation there, and also in 2009, when I co-chaired the ASEAN ROK Commemorative Summit. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the end of the Cold War. And many of us, I think, will have remembered the hopes and expectations that we had when the Berlin Wall came down. We thought that we would be moving into an era of uninterrupted peace and prosperity. That globalization would bring the people from all over the world closer together, understand each other better, and able to share the benefits of global economic growth. While of course the last 30 years, the world has made tremendous progress, has made many achievements, notably in the realm of technology, and also in lifting millions of people out of poverty, we have to admit that the state of the world that we live in today is still a far, far cry from those hopes and expectations that we had, that the promise that the end of the Cold War would bring to us. We live in a world where conflicts abound. Ethnic, religious, nationalistic conflicts, which we thought would be a thing of the past, are still with us. And the conflicts that are taking place are within borders, across borders. Issues such as inequality and marginalization once again are topping the agenda or dominating the political dialogue in so many countries. And we need to take stock of what went wrong or why we were not able to realize the promise that was made to us at the end of the Cold War. For me, the marginalization and inequality is a result of the inability of the system to deliver the benefits of globalization and growth to all the people. That has led to anger, frustration, and disillusionment, which then gave rise to populists, nationalists, extremists, and authoritarians, and undermine liberal democracy, which has been in recession for the last decade and a half. On top of that, we have been unable to deal effectively with some of the daunting challenges common to all of us. So much discussion already this morning about the existential threat of climate change, where we are still working very much against time. The last year and a half, we have seen a pandemic on a scale which we have not seen for over a century. And we have also faced fresh challenges, new issues thrown up by new technology, and for many countries in this region also by a rapidly aging population. Much has already been said about tension between the two biggest economies in the world, the global powers, the United States and China, which has led us to talk about Cold War mentality or even a second Cold War. So for all of us here who aspire to achieve peace and prosperity, and indeed the theme for this forum, this year's forum, is sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity, the work is cut out for us. We need to learn the lessons of the past and pursue actively a fresh set of agenda, both at the domestic and international levels. In all countries domestically, we need to create an environment that is conducive to achieving peace and prosperity. And for me, the priority for all countries now is to address all the inequalities and injustice, which had given rise to hatred, conflict, and the undermining of key institutions that would facilitate the move towards peace and prosperity. For me, to address this, we need to make sure that everybody in the world has access to a good system of economic and social protection against the volatility brought about both by globalization and by new technology. And to do so, we need a politics that respects the rights of all, that encourages full participation from the people, that is sufficiently decentralized to address the diverse needs of people in society. Only an inclusive politics can deliver inclusive prosperity. But as we hear from so many people and distinguished speakers this morning, many of the problems that we face transform and move beyond borders. The pandemic has once again highlighted the shortcoming of global governance and international organizations. Imagine last year, if the WHO was powerful enough to have access to the information of the origin of the pandemic. Imagine if by the middle of the year, we could have some kind of coordinated effort from all governments, having common standards on travel restrictions or lockdowns, surely the scale of the pandemic would not be nearly as big as it is now. And this year, we see the problem of unfair allocation of vaccines, which not only is unjust, but is also going to be delaying the ability of the world to overcome the pandemic. What this highlights is that global governance has always fallen behind globalization. So there is need to reform and strengthen international organizations. We must have fairer representation from all countries. We must have the power of these international organizations over the choices of individual national governments when it comes to matters and problems that transform borders. And already we heard this morning too, that we must revive multilateralism. Recent years have seen unilateral actions on the part of many significant global powers to not play by the rules set by the international community. We have seen phenomena like Brexit. We see trade wars. All this can only lead to more isolation, conflicts, retaliation, which will undermine future peace and prosperity. Multilateralism and cooperation must be revived. And this is all the more essential because there are new issues which need to be addressed at the international or global level. For instance, all the challenges thrown up by new technology. We need new rules, new set of rules on competition law. We need to make sure that the technology, the big tech platforms do not nurture hatred, fake news, do not undermine the fabrics of our societies. We need rules on intellectual property rights, for instance, in terms of access towards essential products like healthcare products and services. All this demands a stronger international arrangement and international cooperation. I'm glad to see that the G7 has finally addressed the issue of taxes to prevent a race to the bottom and to allow many governments in the world to have the resources that they need to address the problems for their own people. At the beginning, I mentioned my visit to the Jeju Island in 2009 for the commemorative summit between ASEAN and the ROK. I'm reminded of the fact that that meeting took place when all the countries involved were facing the impact of the global financial crisis. All those countries had learned a lesson a decade earlier from the Asian financial crisis, and it was a spirit of cooperation and the wisdom of learning from the past that enabled the Asian countries to overcome that financial crisis. We never resorted to protectionism or unilateralism. Rather, we pushed forward with cooperation, even expanded our trade and investment agreements between the ROK and ASEAN. It is that spirit of cooperation and the wisdom of learning from the past that is most needed now as the world moves forward to meet the challenges that I have mentioned before. I hope that the discussions at this forum will contribute to that wisdom, to that spirit of cooperation that will enable us finally to achieve sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. He outlined some of our new challenges that we face as we face a new world post, hopefully, COVID-19. We now have another former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, who will give us his congratulatory remarks. He will join us virtually as well, so we could give him a virtual round of applause.
I want to begin by thanking Wang Hee Ryong, Chairman of the Organising Committee of the Jeju Forum, and Han In Tak, Chairman, Executive Committee of the Forum, for this your very kind invitation. I'm particularly glad to be speaking here alongside my good friends, Ban Ki-moon, François Hollande, and so many other former leaders who are all advocates for both sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity, which are the themes of this year's Jeju Forum. I wish I could be personally with you in Jeju and look forward to that once it's possible to do so again. I also want to begin by congratulating the Jeju Forum on having quickly become a fixture on the international calendar of events. It is in many ways also a great demonstration of South Korea's global commitment to peace and prosperity, whether that be the formation of the G20 and the ROK's role in that, or the ROK's efforts to support the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The theme for this year's forum, Sustainable Peace and Inclusive Prosperity, is also an important reminder that as we emerge from this pandemic, we need to find a way of doing so equitably, including to avoid the important habits of cooperation which the crisis has instilled in us being torn apart. This is particularly important given the wider geopolitical backdrop we find ourselves with today, particularly the state of US-China relations, in my eyes, at their weakest for nearly 50 years, and this affects us all. I've long held the view that in this decade, US-China strategic competition is inevitable, but a war between the US and China is avoidable. 竞争, the Chinese word for competition, comes from Zhuangzi, the classical Chinese philosopher. Jing means running together to see who is faster, and zheng means debating together to see who is better. My understanding is, under a set of mutually agreed rules, may the better one prevail in a fair and open competition. That's why I proposed the concept of so-called managed strategic competition in my recent essay in Foreign Affairs magazine in the United States. Managed strategic competition would involve three key pillars. First, the US and China would need to jointly establish certain hard limits on each other's security policies and contact, and that of their allies in order to manage the escalation of competition into conflict over deep and fundamental security issues. Second, if both sides could agree on a series of such stipulations, each would then have to accept that the other would still try to maximize its advantage while stopping short of breaching the strategic limits of the relationship. For example, Washington and Beijing would continue their competition for strategic and economic influence, bilaterally, multilaterally, and across the various regions of the world. This is the new reality, but this competition would be a bounded competition. Finally, even amid escalating competition, the two countries will have to find room for continued strategic cooperation on critical global challenges in a number of defined areas. This occurred even during the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. It should certainly be possible now between the US and China, when the immediate military stakes may not be nearly as high as those we saw during the Cold War, but where, frankly, the global challenges we face are increasingly pressing. Climate change, combating the pandemic and the next pandemic, improving public health, global economic recovery, global financial stability, stability in debt markets, and nuclear arms control are examples of where cooperation will be necessary for the world's interests, but also the national interests of the United States and the People's Republic of China. We do live indeed in challenging times, times driven by profound geopolitical, geoeconomic, and global public health challenges and change. These are also imposing great challenges on all our national governments. It's important to recognise, however, that here in the region, we are able to shape, manage, and control these challenges if we work together, so that we can realise, in fact, indeed, in reality, a sustainable peace and an inclusive prosperity. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd, for your insights into the global challenges we all face. And we do hope that all our online and virtual speakers will be able to join us offline very, very soon. Now, our next speaker is François Hollande, the former president of France. He will be speaking through a very special method. This is what is called a telepresence hologram. it will seem like he's actually here. So please let's invite him onto the stage with a big round of applause.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Je suis très heureux de pouvoir être
Distinguished guests, nice to meet you all. Although I am physically a little bit far away from Jeju, I understand that Jeju Forum is a meaningful forum in Korea, but it's also very significant in the international arena. Internationally, it is acknowledged as a meaningful and fruitful event. I'm very sad to be joining us online, but you all understand our current COVID situation. So although I am physically apart, I feel very close to you emotionally. I want to extend my special gratitude to Governor Won Hee-ryung. Korea is such a model nation, not just in the economic development, but also during the COVID-19 crisis, the government had utilized its technologies and resources to protect the people. Today's forum is held under the grand theme of prosperity and inclusive peace and inclusive prosperity. We recently had the health crisis, and what we could learn from that is that we have to consider many things for the future that we want to build. I have thrown myself a lot of questions. We must have a lot of trade, but should not intensify the environmental pollution. We must guarantee economic growth, but should also guarantee the free and equal distribution of the value. And we must find ways to have sustainable economy and also have the right energy policy. We should have sound economic policy, but should also have the proper response to health issues. One of the topics to be discussed at the Jeju Forum is what we need to do post the Paris Agreement. At Paris COP26, well, I was so honored to meet the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and have the signing of the Paris Accord. I already know that you are putting a lot of efforts to make the climate agreement a success. However, the prerequisite for our future step is the success of the Glasgow COP26. We have to put the Paris Agreement in the foundation and take additional steps from that. And in the upcoming years, we have to accomplish the carbon neutrality as soon as possible. And I understand that Jeju is going for that earlier than the others. Actually, Jeju has set the goal of 2030 carbon neutrality with the e-mobility and eco-friendly power generation. We are seeing the goal of carbon neutrality being accomplished. In Jeju, you have been hosting the Jeju Forum successfully, and I hope the same for this year's forum. I wish you all success and great health, and thank you for having me here.
Merci, and thank you, President Hollande. Isn't it amazing what technology is able to achieve? I feel like we are looking at the future of teleconferencing. Now, this wraps up our opening session, but before we leave you, we'd like to introduce you to a special event that the Jeju Forum has prepared. We have a visual thinking artist putting together on a computer screen the main topics and the main visions that were outlined in our opening speech. We will show what he has drawn for us during the speech. Wonderful likenesses of all our main speakers. They are in Korean, but they will be translated into English. So if you've forgotten what the main points are, you can always come back and remember who said them. So again, thank you very much for joining us today, this morning, in our opening ceremony. I hope you enjoy this beautiful island of Jeju. And that's it from us, from me, for this opening ceremony. But we have a plenary session 2 that will almost immediately follow this opening ceremony. So please keep to your seats. Thank you very much.